Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to continue covering games from Rabac's Open. This is my round 7 game, in which I faced a very strong, very young opponent with black pieces. I'm going to say he's about 12, 13 or 14, I'm not really sure. And he's very strong, has been progressing rapidly. And I spent a long time preparing for this game because I was expecting several things. He started with pawn to d4, I went d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, and now knight c3 is the main move obviously, but he played e3, which is the quiet Slav. Now here black could play four main moves. Bishop f5, which is what I played, which is the main move. e6 is an invitation to the Meran position with knight to c3. After knight bd7, white could then choose to either play queen to c2 or something else, or bishop to d3, which is the main move. But black could also play bishop g4 here, or a6, which goes into Slav lines, or even g6. So there are many ways to play this position, but I played bishop to f5. And this move has a downside, as you're going to see, which black could, which white could choose to exploit. After knight to c3, pawn to e6, there is one move here that has been played 6,000 times, and that's knight to h4. This is basically the only move for white to play for an advantage, taking the bishop pair. Now black could give it up straight away with the bishop to g6, which is fine, or black could play bishop to e4, which is what I played before in one tournament game I played in Belgrade. So after bishop to e4, f3, now bishop to g6, and taking straight away isn't considered to be the best, but queen to b3. And this is quite complicated, I don't want to get into this, but having provoked f3, black should have enough compensation for the bishop pair. Alternatively, white could play bishop to d3, which is also fine, but my opponent chose bishop to e2, which is an extremely rare move, only about 200 games, and to be honest, I don't understand this move. I think black is more than fine in this position. Black should actually be better because black has an easy London system set up with an easy way to exploit the e4 square, which cannot be challenged anymore. Since the bishop is not on d3, it's very hard to challenge the e4 square, and after I play h6, you're never going to take my bishop. So this position has been played before, but black scores really well, and white basically isn't playing for an advantage. Black is. So how do I prove that I'm better? Here's what I did. White castled, I went knight bd7, knight to d2. This is a risky move, I'm going to say, because it sort of prepares pawn to f3, but it undevelops some more of white's pieces, and I had to spend a long time here because I didn't know the position, basically deciding between bishop e7 and bishop to d6. The only reason why I wouldn't want to play bishop to d6 is if f3, e4 comes quickly enough and then e5 wins a piece. I calculated everything correctly, it doesn't work, so bishop to d6 should be the best move. Now already, if white makes a mistake, there are possibilities of bishop to h2 and knight to g4. My opponent played rook e1, which again I think is too slow, and now I need to strike, and I did, knight e4. So now the position is already quite scary for white. If white does nothing, then queen h4, and the game should be over because I'm attacking both the f2 and the h2 pawn. So what can white do? My opponent took on e4, which I think is the only move. He took with the c knight, and of course I took with the pawn. Now queen h4 is a possibility, queen g5 is a possibility with bishop to h3 ideas, h5, h4 is an idea. So black's attack is very natural, while these three pieces aren't really playing. These three minor pieces and the queen are getting into the game fairly quickly. Not to mention that after h5 I have rook h6, rook g6 ideas. So this is a very easy position for black to play, I'm going to say. My opponent played knight f1. and I played h5. I mean, why not? I'm just going to go h4, h3, and or I'm going to go queen g5, rook h6, rook g6. Here my opponent found a good plan, and he wants to trade off this worst piece on the board for this amazing bishop, which I saw, and it's going to take him some time to do it. And I decided on what I was going to do beforehand, so I played fairly quickly. Queen b3, rook b8, I want to defend my b7 pawn, bishop to d2, he wants to play bishop b4. I went h4, bishop to b4. And I took this, and my coach and I looked at this position, and he was mad at me for taking this bishop. Well, if I take it, I get to play queen g5 with tempo. If I don't take it, I have to decline the trade because I don't really want to lose a piece after knight b6, nor do I want to block my queen with knight f6, nor do I want my knight on f8, where after bishop d6, queen d6, my queen can no longer get to g5. So the alternative is bishop to c7, which leaves my dark squares kind of weak with this bishop on b4, but not really. Now, the best move for white here is king to h1, which makes sense. And now a5, bishop to a3, and queen to f6. Again, with the same ideas of getting into white's position. But having kept this bishop, there are obviously more attacking ideas because I have an extra piece. That being said, again, I was scared about my dark squares. Obviously, there's nothing to be afraid of, but that's very hard to know during a game because it's hard to visualize everything. What I did was perfectly fine. In fact, what I did is the engine recommendation, because after takes, and queen g5, it's much harder for white to defend because the queen alone cannot do much. And again, these two pieces are out of play. My opponent went king h1, which is fine, probably has to be played. And now I made a mistake. This position I've been analyzing for a long time. This is the first critical position in the game, I'm going to say. Whether I exchange the bishop or not is important, but it's not crucial to make the correct call there, because both ideas are fine. This, however, is a critical position in which I cannot afford to mess up, and I did. So, without thinking, I played rook h6. I just played it instantly. I thought that had to be the best move. I saw the other idea, but I just thought that what I did was better. The other idea should be simply winning, and that's to play h3. Now, of course, if this is taken, then, I mean, I take with the rook, and then eventually I take on h2 and win. So g3 is the only move. And now the way to exploit this is I want to get to g2 with my queen. That's the only attacking idea I have. The only other thing I could do, which again depends on whether I can weaken f3 and g2, is pushing the f-pawn and opening the position up. And again, in conjunction with the plan to get onto the light squares, I need to get the e5 square for my knight. So c5 is an idea which I need to employ sooner rather than later. So how do I start? I start with bishop to g4. If this is taken, I'm one step closer. White could go knight d2 or take. Let's say takes, and then knight to d2. Has to defend f3 and g2. And now c5. If this is taken, I can simply castle, and let's say queen to c3 defending the e5 square. If white doesn't defend the e5 square, then I just go knight e5 and here and exchange the knight, play queen f3 and mate him on g2. So after queen c3 I go knight c5, and now the knight is coming in here. This should be winning. So the alternative after bishop to g4 is knight to d2 straight away, but it doesn't really change things. The only thing it changes is that the rook is now on e2. That's irrelevant. So takes. And now I could go queen h5 with tempo on the rook, which is fine. Why not? Let's say the rook drops back, and now again c5. Okay. Now here the engine gives queen a4 as the best move. I Beyond pinning the knight, I do not understand queen a4. So let's say it's because it pins the knight. Let's say I defend with rook to d8, and let's say white takes. I can just castle, and if white is greedy, I now go f5. And this is going to be overwhelming. Let's say rook ad1, cd, ed, and now knight e5 is actually a beautiful win, because if takes, rook takes knight, and queen f3, queen g2 mate. So this position is very, very scary, and according to the engine should be winning after h3, should be winning for black after h3. I didn't see all of that, I didn't think about it, I didn't try to see it, therefore I played rook h6. Okay, here my opponent played f4, and now again, here I did think, and I made a mistake. Whenever you have the option to go en passant while attacking, that's a critical position. That's a rule which you don't really have to remember. Everybody understands that. If you take, the position is way different to the closed pawn structure you can see on the board. So taking or not taking is the critical decision here. I didn't take. If I do take, okay, so he takes with the bishop. I couldn't see a way to make progress, and actually c6 is hanging. I don't know. I don't know. It's not hanging for the moment, but I cannot move my knight. So I would have continued pawn to h3. This was my calculation, and g3, and now bishop to g4 again. And I just couldn't see a way to make progress, because in this position e4 can be played a bit later on, defending the light square somewhat. The queen could come back to d2. So, okay, this is the line. Bishop g4, queen g4, knight to d2, defending f3, and now again c5. And again, queen to c3, and now what do I do here? I just couldn't figure everything out. This is how far I got during the game, or something like this. Of course, white could have deviated. And I couldn't find a way to make progress in this position. In fact, I don't think my king is particularly safe. When I turned on the engine, it says minus 1.5, and the only move to keep a huge advantage is rook h5, which, to be honest, I don't understand at all. I just don't understand it. Okay, rook d8, I sort of do understand. b6, how does that help my attack? I mean, looking at moves like b6 in a position like this during a game is just impossible. I mean, if you play b6 here, what does that do? I never would have thought of b6. But let's say rook h5, which does seem to make most progress. King g1, I mean, those moves make no sense. I don't think any human below like grandmaster level could even consider rook h5. I still don't understand the move. Defense c5 maybe wants to get in here, but what's the difference? Why not rook f6? Okay, so after f4, taking was best. I didn't take. I played queen f6. And I thought, okay, at least this way, his bishop doesn't have a square. His knight is not going to be able to come to e3. He's not going to be able to play e4. His pieces seemed worse if I don't take. The position is still okay. It should be roughly equal, but taking on f3 was much better. He played rook ad1. I played rook g6. He played d5. And I'd expected this. This is now becoming an extremely complicated middle game with a lot of tension, in which I'm no longer the one attacking. Now both of us are attacking, because my king is stuck in the center, and the center is about to get blown open, unless I can close it down, which I did, which is the correct decision. Taking e takes and c takes and c5 is also fine, after queen a5 and maybe a6. But I played c5 straight away. I'm, of course, not afraid of d6 because I win the queen. So queen a4 and now e5. And I thought by closing the center and attacking f4, I should have a more pleasant position because I'm going to have a relative safety. He played d6 here, which is okay. And I played a6. I don't really want to take on f4 because as soon as I take on f4, his knight gets the e3 square once this pawn is gone. So, and the knight coming into d5 is strategically much better for white, of course. So e5 wasn't really to attack f4 unless an opportune moment comes. It was really to block the center and keep his pieces out of play. The queen came back to c2. I played queen e6. This is sort of a weird move, but I wanted to be able to play f5 if possible. He played rook to d5. Also there were some problems with my e4 pawn, so I didn't want to lose that. Okay, he played rook d5, and here I should have just continued king f8, and after something like, I don't know, b3, just rook d8. This seems good enough, eventually trading off these two pawns. But I played queen back to f6, bishop h5. Yeah, here the engine thinks white is better after h3, and with the idea of bishop g4, that's a very hard idea to play. I mean, allowing black to open up the h file in exchange for the e4 pawn seems suicidal. He played bishop h5, which I'd expected. I played rook h6. He went back to d1, and I played bishop to e6. Okay, the rook drops back. The bishop goes back to f5. I couldn't find an easy way to make progress here. Again, if I take on f4, then the knight gets the e3 square. If I play g5, then the position again opens up. And that may be the best idea, but first I have to protect e4. Okay, rook e2, rook c8. I wanted to defend c5 and maybe get my rook to c6 to take the d6 pawn. Again, the engine says king f8 is the best move. I didn't think that my king safety was crucial here, or I did, but I didn't think that my king was safer on f8 than on e8. He played rook f2, and now I did take on f4, because if he takes with the pawn, then I can simply win a rook because I attack the queen. So that doesn't work, which means that he has to take with the rook, which means that his knight doesn't have the e3 square, which I was happy to see. Okay, now g5 doesn't work because bishop to g4 wins my bishop, so I need to unpin first. So queen e6. And this should be a blunder according to the engine. The engine actually says g5 best move. Okay, so g5, of course, bishop g4 not possible immediately. The rook drops back to f2, and now queen to g6. And this was much better than what I did, and seeing it, it makes perfect sense. I just didn't want to waste another move moving my queen, but having a pawn on g5 is nice. Now the line continues queen c3 and king f8, and after bishop to a4, simply king to g8. And I should be better here. Again, it's so complicated that it's very hard to figure out who's better and why, but visually these two pawns look nice and my king looks safer than white's. I played queen e6, bishop to g4 anyway. Of course, if I take on g4, then rook takes on e4, winning my queen, which I did see, and I'd planned to play rook f6. If I go g6, then he simply plays rook to d5 and triple attacks my bishop. So rook f6, bishop f5, rook f5, queen e4. If he plays rook e4, yeah, excuse me, I should mention that after rook f6, there's a threat of taking on f1, so rook e4 is not possible. This was the idea behind queen e6. I'm sorry, the position was very complicated, and now it's been over a month, so I cannot recall all of my thoughts, but taking on f1 was one of the threats. So bishop f5, rook f5, rook e4 fails to rook f1 checkmate, so queen e4. And now I have to take, so queen e4, rook e4 check, and now I just lost the position in one move. There's still a way to keep a relative balance in this position, even though white is much better because of his pawn on d3. But I should play king to f8. And of course, rook takes, again, fails to rook takes f1, so he needs to play king to g1, and now I play g5. And white is better, white is a pawn up, but it's not really clear whether he's going to be able to keep this pawn. And somehow I'm going to be able to untangle in this position. What I did just loses straight away. I played rook e5 and now I can resign. Rook h4. And that's it. I mean, firstly I have to defend against checkmate, so either knight f6 or knight b6. I chose the wrong one, knight f6 was better. Knight f6, d7, knight d7, rook h8, check, and knight f8 should be close to equality, or better for white, but maybe I can hold. But after knight b6, it's game over. King g1, king d7, rook g4, g6, rook f4, rook f8, knight g3. Obviously, 2 pawns down, and with a disgusting position, there's nothing. I tried rook e3, even though I saw it wins the exchange, but I tried to complicate things somewhat. I should mention that we were both really low on time, and having played such a complicated middle game, it's no wonder we were. Okay, knight e4, trapping my rook, threatening king f2, king c6, d7, rook d8, and now king f2, knight c4, and rook c2. This is the idea. It just traps a piece, so I need to take on e4, and after rook e4, knight to d6. I thought I may be able to hold this position, rook e7. I cannot really trade, because if I trade off a pair of rooks, then it's simply losing. f5, rook g7, g5. He cannot take on g5 because knight e4, but simply king f3. And here I played knight e4, he played g4, and I resigned. This is just hopeless. Knight e4 is of course a blunder, but I'm losing anyway. So this was a tough game. I have to say, a very tough game. After h5, I was really happy with my position, and then this idea of trading off bishops, taking is okay. Queen g5 and king h1, missing h3, which would have been a winning position for black. As you saw, it's very hard for white to defend everything. It's impossible for white to defend against the idea of exchanging of the bishop on e2 and getting my queen into f3 in conjunction with c5, getting the e5 square for my knight. That's very scary. So I messed that up, and also after f4 I didn't open the position up. That's another mistake. And then finally in the position where I should have played g5 here, I didn't, and this would have been fine. Instead I played queen e6, and the position was just much better for white, and my opponent converted nicely without any stress. He looked so calm, I was stressed. We were both low on time, but you could see that he's handling it nicely, and I just couldn't. So yeah, that was round 7. I'll see you tomorrow for round 8, which was the last round that I played in the tournament. Yeah, okay. I hope you got something from this game. Remember to play knight h4 and the quiet Slav if you play the quiet Slav. Yeah, stay tuned for more chess. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.